Okay. And then where's the AI button here? There it is, AI companion. Okay, go ahead.
So
Go
what I was going
with
to say
your.
is that we have a moral obligation
Mhm.
to other people. And you know, when we empathize, there's a moral component to it, is what I
Mhm.
was getting at.
And Lee, what we're doing is, I don't know how much Jody explained, we're working on a definition project to explore the definition of empathy. And I have a whole site on that called Defining. Let me put the link in. And we've also been documenting our meetings. Let me just, uh, so this is the site, and I'll just do a screen share of it just to kind of guide you through it. And I just added you to give you permissions to edit,
Yeah, I just saw that.
Jody. So this is, I mean, I just been putting, this is kind of more of a project work site here. We can go through, we have a section here on meetings, and these are the meetings that Jody and I have held. So you can go through and we have, and are you okay with us putting the video on YouTube too? I mean, I put two of them on YouTube, but Jody,
I'm okay with that.
okay,
Yeah.
good, me too. So yeah, so I mean, this is the meeting. I think I don't know if I posted. We can actually add the. So we have a summary of our meeting. So we run it through Zoom. And that makes a an outline of everything we talked about. And then I also have a program called Otter AI, which creates a transcript, so you can click through, and it also creates an AI summary. So it really documents our meeting, everything that we talked about. So you can always go back and copy and paste and stuff, or just remember what we talked about. And this is our meeting today. And I gave you editing permission so you can edit this. Jody, you think you click on, not annotate. There's not sure why it's not letting me edit right now, but, oh, and if you go to the home page and you click edit, it moves, it goes into the editing mode, and then you can go to the specific page, um, which this is sort of the editing mode. You can kind of
Okay.
open up our page today.
Yeah, I
And
can see that. I'm in editing mode right now,
oh,
so
okay, there you go.
that's giving me permission to do that. Great.
So anyway, just to give you a little bit of a bit, just for kind of documenting everything that we're doing, and so we can. I'm also finding that that also the AI, it's actually going into all the YouTube material, and really all of YouTube is kind of being put into the
Transcribe.
consciousness of AI. So
Wow.
it becomes part of the knowledge base, I guess, for humanity in a sense. So just by putting our recordings in, we're kind of adding to the knowledge base on this topic.
Yeah,
So
that's pretty cool.
Hey, this is wonderful. I think I'm kind of behind. I need to learn more about how to utilize the AI tool. I think it's a wonderful way to facilitate the meeting and to make it more efficient.
And
yeah,
Otter AI, is that something you pay for?
it is. I have an account. If there's something you want to run, I mean, yeah, it's over $100, but it does transcriptions. And I've gone through all of my videos, for the past 12, 13
Oh my
years
gosh,
and
that's
put them
crazy.
into, and I have transcriptions of everything now, like all those interviews I did and stuff. So and it does a pretty good job too. And it also creates that AI. And now it's a new feature that it creates the AI summary. So
Yeah,
I
that's
can,
helpful.
I can
Yeah,
show
I
that.
have several videos, probably 10 or 12, that I need to put through AI to get a transcript so I can start doing some qualitative coding.
I remember those days when I did the qualitative research class and you try to do the transcription. Oh, it takes hours to
Oh,
complete.
yeah, that is not a thing that humans should ever do again. Because I've done that in the past too. And it was a time drain.
Yeah.
Yeah, those are, There are some aspects of AI that I just think I'm so grateful that we don't ever have to do that again. Um, I want to share with both of you something that's really interesting that I think will interest both of you based on conversations that we've had. Um, Edwin, I've explained to you a little bit about my experiment where I'm going to have polarized pairs come into the lab and have a political conversation. And I've been trying to figure out how to scale it to like a nationally representative sample. And so I started playing around with AI to see what it can do in order to have rather than the individual participant interacting with another participant in the study, have them interact with the AI and have the same kind of conversation. And it was fascinating. So the other night I just sat and I had 3 different conversations. One was focus on empathizing with the other person's perspective. The second one was focus on sticking to your values. And whatever like if this is a topic that's important to you for certain reasons, just stick to that. And then the third was trying to bridge the two of them, stick to your values and try and empathize with the other person's perspective. And it did such a good job of simulating those different scenarios.
Wow.
Even better than I was doing. And Lee, I was really appreciating last night. I was looking back through that article that you sent me about the social desirability bias embedded in the AI. So I do need to take that into consideration, especially when I want it to kind of push back, like not empathize, because it is socially desirable to empathize. And so I found that when it was the stick to your convictions condition, it had a hard time with that. So it was sticking to its convictions until one point when it said, I can see how you would see that. And so after, like, I was debriefing with it afterward, and I said, you did a really good job, except at that moment when you said you were acknowledging my perspective, that's not what we were supposed to be doing in this condition. And it was, cheeky. It said, oh, you got me there. Yeah, I'll try and do better next time. But I think there's some very real research possibility here, especially because it's something that everybody wants to research right now. So this is actually the way I'm going to do the study now. I'm not going to do the in-person version anymore. I'm actually going to have it all be online, and each person is going to interact with the AI. And so I have a computer scientist that's going to help me do all of the coding. And this is going to be my dissertation. I'm super excited about it. So I'm actually going to have it be 4 different experiments. The first one will be political, because that's kind of the buzz topic right now. Nobody can agree on anything. But then I'm also going to extend it to business scenarios. So I'm going to have 2, and this is one where I think I'll have to make it clear that it is an AI that they are interacting with, rather than having any sort of deception involved, making them think that it's a human. So I'll set up the scenario. This is why, Edwin, I think it's going to be interesting to you. It's going to be an imaginative empathy scenario, because they're imagining that they're in a business negotiation of some sort. And so then they'll have those three different conditions again, where you empathize, or you stick to your guns, or you try and do both. And then there's the control group as well. And then I'm going to extend it to interfaith dialogue as well. And then also family situations. So I haven't quite nailed down exactly what each one of those will look like what the exact scenario will be. But yeah, so with these 4 different studies, I'll be able to get a lot of quantitative data from it, but then also some really interesting linguistic analysis that the AI can help me do as well. So looking at things like the length of their response. So, if you are holding to your convictions, are you going to be more terse, or are you going to be more like talk more, right? And what kinds of words do you use when you are empathizing versus when you're trying to stick to your convictions? And going back to my pilot work, I guess I'm calling it pilot work, but it was just me and the AI late at night. We had that kind of relationship. The most interesting thing that came out of our discussions was that I found that in the condition where you try and hold to your conviction and see the other person's perspective, that was the only one of the 3 that we actually came to a solution.
Mm.
It
Mm-hmm.
was rather than just stalemate or just learning mode where you're just thinking about, okay, I want to learn from you. We brought those two together and then we actually made progress. So we were talking about defunding DEI, and uh, so I actually played the role of, in one of the scenarios I was conservative, and the other scenario, one of the scenarios I was liberal, and so we were just having these discussions with the talking points that come up on both sides of the issue. But in neither case, the perspective taking case or the convictions case, did we come up with any alternative, like other solution other than just it's the Democrats or the Republicans, right? But in the third, we came together and we found maybe it might be a good idea to reallocate funds to early childhood education. So that was just one idea of many potential that would be out there. But that's something I hadn't really thought about before engaging in that condition, which I thought was really fascinating from the actual experience of me going through the experiment myself.
Mm.
So that was an interesting takeaway, and so that's what I'm
Mm-hmm.
going to move forward with.
So, um, Lee, what I'm looking at is defining empathy within the context of the empathy circle. So I just put the link in there to the empathy circle, how it works. So what I try to do is the things that we talk about, try to fit that into an empathy circle, which we can practice, perhaps, the three of us at some point as we get a sense of that. But I'm understanding, Jodie, what you're saying is that the model is that if it's a circle of people, they just have their strong opinions. In this case, somebody, AI is doing imaginative empathy, imagining itself being someone in the circle, and it's not reflecting, right? It's just having an argument without
Mhm.
any kind of mutual understanding or active listening. And then another model would be the empathy circle is another model where you have a strong opinion, but you're reflecting what the other side is saying. And is
Right.
AI able to reflect? Does it
Yeah,
do active listening? Oh, that's
it
nice.
does a really good job
Mhm.
of it.
Oh,
I'm going to find the transcript and share it with both of you. Let me see, where did I? Because I wanted to be able to go back through and analyze what I actually
hmm.
learned from it, and so I saved it. So you can keep talking, but while you're talking, I'm going to try and find that.
Yeah, I'm just explaining how trying to map it because the empathy circle at the basic is I find it's one of the best practices for actually practicing and deepening empathy. And that's like there's one speaker, they speak a little, for an idea or two, and they pause, and their listener, you select the listener, they reflect back their understanding of what you've said until you feel heard and understood to your satisfaction, and then you speak some more, and then you get a reflection. Maybe you speak that idea or two and you get a reflection, and we have time limits, like maybe 5 minutes per speaker. And then when the time is up or the speaker has nothing else to say, the listener is their turn to speak, and they select someone in the group. And that would actually be something in to have an empathy circle between AI in doing taking on all roles.
Oh, yeah, I was thinking exactly the same thing.
That would like what would happen if we could even I could even imagine we do some kind of a I mean it could be something like a little video of these AI characters having an empathy circle with each other, right? Or we could even have like Trump and Biden
Yeah.
in simulated
Huh?
AI, and they're having their discussion through an empathy circle or something like that. So yeah,
Yeah, I think
I
that
can
would
see a
be
lot of
really fun.
possibilities here.
Absolutely. And it is really, really good at taking on different roles.
Hmm. Oh.
Um, that's why I wanted to try it out on my own before trying to start coding things and putting it into Qualtrics and all of that. I just wanted to see if it works. And I expected that it would be a matter of you have to code it and code it and code it and redo your prompts all over again. And but it the first time through, it was
Hmm.
really impressive how well it did. So I shared that document with you. I actually do encourage you both to look through it. It is 26 pages.
I
This
don't see it.
I shared it, and so I don't know why it's not.
Sharing is not turned
Did
on.
you hit return?
It says that it's shared with you. So I'm not sure why that's not coming
Hmm.
through.
And you're saying with in the chat? Oh, you might have put it into the AI. There's a AI.
No, actually, I shared the document with you and allowed you to be commenters on it, but you here, there it
Oh,
is.
there it is. I see. Uh-huh.
So
Oh,
if you want
okay.
to look
Huh.
through that, it might be interesting to both of you, just to see what the possibilities are. And Edwin, a few weeks ago, Lee and I had a discussion about AI and how it's becoming more human-like, and how, just talking about some of the different drawbacks and positives. And so I've been looking into a lot of research looking at how it actually can be empathic. And there's one paper that was put out last year from Daryl Cameron and his grad student that looked at empathic AI, and they found that it actually does a better job of filtering out biases than humans do. And so it's able to reflect more authentically. Maybe authentically isn't the right word, but like in an unbiased way than humans can. And so I thought that was really interesting. And so I'm going to be looking into some more of their research. He's the one that I've been trying to have a conversation with for the last month and a half. And
Hmm.
it's just,
Hard to
we
get
keep,
a hold of him.
well, we keep getting on the schedule and then he cancels and cancels and cancels. So
Hmm.
I was supposed to meet with him last Monday and then it was going to be last Thursday. But I think we're just going to have to communicate through email because I think he's just too busy to put something else on his schedule. But now that he knows that I'm engaged with empathic AI, maybe he's going to take me more seriously. But his research has been really, really helpful in the empathy world.
Mm. I found it fascinating for what you're doing, Jodie. I think your research is sounds like it's very promising, and I'll be curious, if a person interact with the AI after they learn from the AI, let's say, will it improve their interaction with other people in real
And
life? But
yeah,
then,
that's actually one of my hypotheses.
yeah, but anyway, it will build up your research work. So I don't know, that's something for the future, but you already made me curious about how
Yeah.
to take.
No, and that's actually something that I was really thinking about because it was, as I was going through the interaction, it was helping me to remember how to do the skills that I was telling it to do. So it was much better at reflective listening than I was. And so, I found myself getting into sharing my perspective mode, but not being very good at reflecting back what it was saying to me.
Hmm.
So that was really insightful.
Is it when you reflect back what it's saying, is it saying it's been heard and understood, or does it say, no, you didn't understand me, this is what I said?
No, there wasn't any of that. And that's probably largely due to the fact that I didn't prompt it to have the conversation be that way.
Hmm.
And it was pretty brief in all three of the scenarios. I think we only talked for about 10 minutes for each scenario. So it's a pretty brief version of it. And Edwin, as I've been thinking more about how to research this, it's really tricky. And I think I mentioned this a few weeks ago. It's really tricky from an experiment perspective to have different scenarios that are similar enough to the empathy circle to have something to compare it to. And so that's why what I have here is I'm going to give very short prompts that are all almost identical. So I can read them to you. So at some point within all of this, I need to figure out how to do a study with the empathy circle, just the way that you like, exactly in the format that you have it. But I'll share my screen with you if that's okay.
Oh, let me give you a co-host. Okay.
Okay. So here are my different scenarios, and you can see I want it to be as similar as possible, whatever the prompt is that they receive, so that there aren't confounding variables of like the length of it or how much guidance they receive. Because with an empathy circle, you have to, it works like you've explained to me, it works best if you have a facilitator for the
It's
first.
only the first couple times if you have a facilitator, just so
Yeah.
people stay within the practice. But if once everybody knows the process, you don't need a facilitator, just need someone to keep time.
Yeah, it gets harder to study it because when there's longer periods of time and there are multiple people involved in it, you just can't control all of the little nuances. And so this is the way that I'm trying to control all of the nuances, and I'm taking out the human component and I'm just going to have the AI. And so they're not going to have that X factor of the way that the other person responds to them, or the way that even coming into the lab, like interacting with the research team, if any of those things would affect the outcome, then if we, it's called a confounding variable that we just, it's harder to account for all of that. So that's why I have these very short statements, so it's as crystal clear as possible, like across the three different conditions. And so, Lee, do you have any thoughts on how I could make the control group as similar as possible to this, rather than just saying, "Okay, go have a conversation"? Because I don't want the fact that there isn't a prompt to be the thing that changes the outcome. Edwin, if you have any thoughts as well, that would be very much appreciated.
I
Doing
think,
this.
okay, I think in your prompt conditions there, you're trying to say that, well, for this particular treatment group, let's say treatment group one, you want them to focus on the active listening part because that active listening is an essential element of being empathic to another person, right?
Mhm.
Okay, so the first question is, yeah, maybe that's fine by itself. Is that sufficient when we say that someone is actively listening to understand another person's perspective?
Yeah, that's a good
But
question.
if that is sufficient itself, then maybe it's fine. Okay. And so first glance is maybe it's okay, but I have to think more about it. For the second condition, you have someone engaging in conversation while they focus on maintaining their opinion, feelings, and values, regardless of what the others say. Okay. So conviction. So yeah. So here's the. So when we say someone is convicted to one's value, that means so maintaining. So I'm trying to understand your definition here. So it seems like how do we know someone is convicted to one's value, opinion, feeling, value?
Yeah. So it's I've been toying around with different ways of saying that, and that's the best
Yeah.
I've come up with. But
Mm.
if it's going to be problematic for people who don't quite know what it means and they need a little bit more explanation, then that's helpful feedback to get from somebody who's seeing it for the first time.
I'm not saying yes or no, but I'm trying. I actually that was in my mind too. How do we know someone is convicted, right, to
Mhm.
something, to some value? I suppose the word maintaining is good, right? You maintain one's value. But
Yeah.
why do you say that you also maintain your opinions and feelings? Does it matter? Does it matter to this point when we say one's value? Maybe from the holistic perspective, yeah, maybe. So I'm not saying I'm not dismissing. I'm sorry. I'm trying. I'm in the deep mode of trying to understand what the term means. But I suppose it's okay.
Well,
Well,
one and three are very similar, right? They're kind of the same, except you're telling people to be stubborn about your opinions. Don't let go of them or something, or isn't that
yeah. And so, I mean, if we look at it from the perspective of self other overlap, maybe that's another way we could even talk about this is like maintain your sense of self. And when you're empathizing with someone and you have, like we've discussed, Edwin, that sense of my perspective and your perspective are starting to overlap. So in that second treatment, I'm wanting them to try really hard to not overlap. And I'm not interested in this condition as much as I'm interested in this condition. So treatment group 3 is really the one that I want to see if this works for people to do both at the same time.
I'm kind of wondering at the motivation behind this topic. Is it that when you were going through your issues with these people in conflict that you were losing your sense of self and you're wondering like how do you maintain your sense of self? I'm kind of looking at what's the what's the motivation, but what you're looking at is it your own experience of losing yourself that you're trying
Um,
to
yeah,
get to?
and also looking at it politically, we just end up in an impasse all the time because we see the other side as unreasonable and we see them as bad people. And so we get so defensive about our viewpoints that we tend to shut other people's viewpoints out. Um, and but then there are also people like myself in the past where I've been a self-defined empath where I just take on other people's feelings and other people's perspectives. And I did get to that point that I was losing my sense of self. And so, what I'm really wanting to look at is maybe in the future, I want to look at it from more of an emotional perspective. But this iteration of it, I really am looking at um, opinions. And so, maybe having, I guess, right there, I have opinions and feelings in this same one. But really, what I want to focus on is like don't let them convince you of anything. Is treatment group 2. But treatment group 3 would be the one where you value where they're coming from and you value where you're coming from.
I was just thinking maybe the three of us could do an empathy circle. So Lee is on has the experience of the empathy circle as a framework. Um, we
Yeah,
just
that would
do a
be fun.
short empathy circle, just talking about whatever we're talking about now, but using the empathy circle for that, just so you understand the framework. Because in the definitions of empathy, you know, definitions tend to get very sort of abstract and kind of all floaty out there. And what I'm trying to do is have the empathy circle as a practice that we actually do, and that we can map what's happening with the definitions onto specifics of what's happening in the empathy circle. So Jodie and I did a active listening with each other, sort of a mini empathy circle. But if the three of us did it, then we have, I think, more of a reference. So you would, Lee, so if you would stop to share, maybe we could just have
Yeah.
that, yeah.
Yeah,
So does
I
that
think
work for you?
that would be interesting because
Okay.
I think for empathy circle, right, when you have two people, you interact with each other. It's like, oh, okay, is this what I'm hearing from you? And then you try to paraphrase the other person, right? But when
Exactly.
you have three people, I think it's kind of an interesting dynamic there. How do you make sure that we are understanding all of us, right? You're not just understanding one person or the other. So I appreciate the opportunity to practice with you how this empathy circle might work, especially when we have more than two people.
Okay, so
So if I'm hearing,
I'll be the first listener and you're the first speaker already, Lee.
oh,
So I'm
oh,
hearing that you're seeing that, and you'll have 3 minutes to speak, and I'm going to reflect back, and I'll keep time. So I've started the timer. So you're interested in seeing how two people they can do active listening with each other, and it seems like you're comfortable with active listening, and that you're just kind of curious how it works with three people in doing active listening with each other. And I think there was more to it that I didn't quite get.
Yeah, I think you pretty much get what I was trying to say. I'm interested in the dynamics of a group when you have more than two people. Yeah,
Okay, so you're interested in the dynamics of active listening in a group of more than two people. So just a sense you're feeling a sense of curiosity about that.
correct.
Is there more?
Oh, oh,
You
yeah.
have 2 minutes
But
left. Or you
I
can,
see. Oh, so now my curiosity is that, okay, now I'm interacting with you, but how will Jody come into play, right, in that case, right?
and
So
oh, I see.
how do I know that Jody is really understanding me, or if, I don't know, or if there is anything or any other thought that might be very important that I might be missing in this empathy circle?
Yeah, so you're curious, like with three people, I'm reflecting back and my understanding of what you're saying, but you're curious about the silent listener. We call that the silent listener, if they're really following what you have to say as the speaker, and you're kind of curious, is she really following what you're understanding what you're saying?
Right, right. So after what you said, I don't know. So it seems like you're just reflecting on what the other person said. You can also add on to what has been said already. Am I correct?
Yeah, you're just curious how the empathy circle works. If like I'm giving reflection right now, and you're wondering if I can add something to on top of maybe my own ideas to what you're saying. And just as a technical point, they'll say, no, all I do is reflect back until it's my turn to speak, and then I can share anything. So that's
Okay,
a stepping out of the circle for a second. Yeah.
I see. Then would it be very boring to the person when you're just reflecting?
Sorry, can you say that again?
Because I'm just saying that, well, in that case, would that be very boring? Because when you're just reflecting, I mean, it's fine. I'm glad that you understand what I said, right? But on the other hand, I think for real enriching or engaging conversation, you also want to hear the feedback from the other person. So it could be more than just reflection itself, right?
Mhm.
So
So what I'm hearing there is that you're thinking, oh, that's probably just boring, just getting reflection back of what you're saying, because you really want to hear what I have to say, and just me reflecting back my understanding, you think would be boring.
I, yeah, I'm just saying that maybe sometimes we can, in a natural conversation, you not only hoping that the other person get what you want to say, you may also want to hear the feedback from the other person. You may also want to hear any more additional information that will enrich each other's knowledge, feelings, or relationship, etc. Right?
Yeah, so
So,
if that's the time you had your 3 minutes. So what I'm hearing, I'll just give you a final reflection that you're thinking that saying in a conversation, you want to hear what the other person has to say in response, that enriches the conversation. And if you're only just reflecting back what the person says, that might be kind of boring. And so we have 3 minute turns. Your turn is up, and then it's my turn to speak, and I select my listener, and I'll select Jodie to be my listener. So
Right on.
to to address what Lee is saying, that now it's my turn to speak, and now I can add to what Lee has been saying, and I can add my own comments. But there's a period of time where only she speaks and only gets heard. But now is the time for me to add to what she says, or just to speak about whatever's on my mind. So we do have space for that.
Okay, so to reflect back to you, the role that you're playing now is now you're the speaker, and I am going to be the listener. And you have the opportunity to respond to what Lee said. And additionally, you can speak about whatever is on your mind as well.
Yeah. So, but we've had a period where Lee just was heard to her satisfaction. She didn't have to compete to be heard. She didn't have me talk over her. She didn't have me, grab the topic and change the topic. She got to just share whatever she wanted and was sure that she would be heard to her satisfaction. So that's what we're kind of going for.
Okay, so what we're going for here is giving each person the opportunity to be heard to their satisfaction. And so when Lee was talking, she had the opportunity to experience what that feels like to just be heard. And now it's your turn to respond to her.
Yeah, and that part of you listening to me, Jody, is empathy. I see that as you're empathizing, listening, sensing into what I have to say. And that's what I'm saying is the core part of empathy. What we're doing right now is creating a structure where we're focusing on your empathic listening of my experience. And I have the floor and yeah. So,
So when you have the floor, you feel emboldened to say what it is you need to say. And my role is to engage in what you call the core of empathy, which is this practice of active listening.
and Lee was concerned about what you were thinking while you were the silent listener. Like I was the active listener, she was the speaker, and you were the silent listener. I hear that she's concerned about what's Jody thinking as the silent listener. And when it's your turn to speak, you'll be able to share whatever was on your mind. So you'll have a space to share as well.
Okay, so Lee had mentioned that she was concerned about what is the role of the silent listener when the two of you are interacting. What am I doing? And your response to her is that when it's my turn to talk, then I get to share my thoughts.
And the other part of it that I'm seeing, Jody, that is of concern to you is that experience you had of losing your sense of self. And it's like, what is the role? What does the empathy circle do in terms of maintaining your sense of self? Because, empathy is you empathize, but you always have the self-other distinction. And I think that the empathy circle helps with self-other distinction and not getting kind of lost in the world of someone else.
Mhm. So you see the empathy circle as an opportunity to maintain that sense of self other distinction. And my concern, you mentioned, had been whether when you are empathizing with someone else, if you are able to maintain that sense of self. And the empathy circle has shown to provide that space for you to have your own
Hmm.
sense of self as well.
Yeah, I feel heard. That's my time too.
Okay. So, Lee, I'm going to direct my comments to you. And I do feel that it's happening for me again, where I'm so caught up in listening and reflecting back that sometimes it's hard for me to formulate my own thoughts.
Okay. Jody, I think you are saying that sometimes when you get so focused on listening and reflecting, and that you forget your own thoughts.
Yeah,
So,
and to build on what you were saying, Lee, in a typical conversation, it is really enriching to have more um, immediate feedback, right? To be able to hear what the person thinks in the moment, and it's more, it's not as formal.
so you're saying that in a typical conversation, people look for immediate feedback and it's not very formal in general.
Yeah, and the way that I see the empathy circle, and when it's Edwin's turn, he can respond to this as well. But the way that I have seen it and the way he's mentioned it is that this is kind of a training ground where it gives us the opportunity to experience in a very formal, structured setting what it would it actually the experience of empathizing with another person. And so rather than expecting that we take this format into our everyday interactions, it's more of a training ground, the way I see it.
Right. So the way Jodie you see it is that this empathy circle is a way of training. It's a way that we experience how we can listen to other and in a structured way, right? How we can try to empathize others in a structured way. And so I suppose listening is a very, very fundamental in that sense. I'm not sure if I'm adding too much.
No,
I
I
think
think
that's really what you're trying to say.
yeah, that's what I was trying to say. And Edwin has mentioned that people find that after they leave the empathy circle interactions, they find themselves interacting in a more empathetic way in their everyday interactions. And I think that that's very valuable because this acts as that maybe intervention, and then the world becomes a better place. It's not just in the empathy circle that we interact more effectively, it's out in the world that we interact more effectively.
Uh-huh. Oh, okay. So basically, you're saying that this is coming from Edwin, and that the idea of empathy circle is a practice that we can take for real life. After we practice it in the empathy circle, we can become better in our own life experiences with others, to have
Yeah.
more empathy with others.
Yeah. And I have one follow-up question. Oh, I guess my time is up. So I do feel heard. Thank you.
So you can select anyone. Lee, if you want to kind of mix it up, you can speak back to Jody or
Oh, I didn't
whoever.
know that.
Oh, okay. Well, um,
Who are you
yeah, so
speaking to? It's your choice.
let me try Jodie because
Okay.
last time I have spoken with you. And so I'm really glad to take this experiment with both of you together. I find it interesting. um, because it seems like to me empathy. The easiest way I put it is that when I watch a movie, I feel what the character is feeling. I cry when they cry, I cry.
Hmm.
When they laugh, I laugh. I think that's empathy to me. But
Yeah. So can I reflect back? Is that okay?
yeah.
Um, so you're enjoying experiencing this empathy circle experiment, I guess, together with us. And the way that you have experienced empathy in other settings is when you watch a movie, you feel very connected with the character. And when they laugh, you laugh. When they cry, you cry.
Mhm. And so I think the exercise is worthy to me because I think that active listening is actually not as easy as people think. Sometimes we really don't listen to other people. We just jump over to the other person and we skip it and completely. So I think yeah, today I think I have maybe captured most of it, but I still might be missing something from your conversation. But I think it's good for me to do the exercise again, to learn more about myself.
Okay, so you're experiencing that active listening is something that we don't do well and we don't do it often enough, and so this is giving you the opportunity to experience it, and it's helping you to see that maybe you need to work on this skill. Did I understand that correctly?
Yes, yes,
Okay.
definitely. You put it in a nice way. And I do think that I, I think this is good. I think a lot of people need to practice it. And I think in the beginning, I was a little worried that I'm just talking to one person, but now I see how it will work for the whole group. And so I feel good about doing the empathy circle, you know. I don't know if 3 minutes is a good time, if you have experiment a shorter time or longer time.
And so You were saying, and I kind of forgot the first part of what you were saying. I'm really sorry. But perhaps this is something that more people need to practice as well. And you're understanding better now what the value of the empathy circle, rather than it just being one person. You're seeing the value of how you interact with the whole group. And you're also, oh, so am I done? Am I done reflecting back?
No, no, you continue until you give the final reflection, the full reflection. Go ahead,
Oh,
finish
okay.
your reflection.
Okay. And so you were also asking about what would be, you don't know that 3 minutes is the right amount of time, and you were just wondering if there's any sort of value to experimenting with shorter or longer amounts of time for each person to speak.
Yeah, I think you got most of it.
Okay.
I also have questions too, like how
So you can hold your question until it's your speaking turn.
oh, I see.
Yeah,
Okay. All right, go ahead.
right.
And so what
I
do
recommend writing it down. Otherwise, you'll forget it like I do. All right. So I guess that means it's my turn.
Yes.
So I'll speak to Edwin because my
Okay,
question is
listening.
actually directly for you. I am curious also if you have experimented with different directions. For example, of what I'm thinking of is when it's my turn to reflect, that's the thing, that's the process that makes me forget what I was going to say. So if it were a matter of when you're done reflecting, then it's somebody else's turn to start speaking, then that gives me the chance to think again of what I was going to say.
Yeah, so you're wondering if the structure could be different, that someone else is the speaker instead of the person that was listening, because it's the reflection part that's making you forget what you're wanting to say and giving you that blank. And so just other structures, wondering about that.
Yeah. And so I don't know if that's something that anybody has played around with. I don't know how much flexibility there is within the circle. So if we're looking at it from the perspective of researchers, because Lee and I are both researchers, we always want to look at things as experiments, right? It would just be interesting to look at, length of time, direction, how much flexibility there is within the structure, and to see what kinds of differences each one of these different iterations might make.
So you're seeing there's all these different components of the empathy circle, and just seeing that each of the components could be changed. And curiosity, as researchers, you're both probably curious about what would happen by changing the different parameters.
Yeah. And so I do feel heard. I would love to hear your thoughts on that.
Okay, I'll speak back to you then. And yeah, I'm very glad to have experimentation around the empathy circles. The issue of time, the reason we're doing 3 minutes of time, for example, is because this is a short circle. And if we have longer circles, we expand the time to maybe 5 minutes. And you can even have no limits as well. So all those parameters are, have different effects, and glad to experiment with all the different parameters.
Okay. So your experience has been that there are the different parameters that are flexible and they can be experimented with. One of them being the time limits. Right now, we're using a 3 minute time limit because we're doing a shorter circle. Often you'll use a 5 minute time limit for a longer empathy circle, and you've even used no time limit.
Yeah, and they have different effects. So when I was doing mediation between the political left and right, everybody wants to talk. There's this, I want to get my opinion out there, and that's where the battle kind of comes for attention. So I'll do like 3 minute turns to keep it short, so everybody has a chance to speak initially, and then maybe after a few rounds, I'll expand it to 5 minutes. But that first part is to kind of get everybody's voice into the space. So that's like a parameter that's changing. Yeah.
Oh, that's so interesting. So, when you have mediated between the left and the right, you have used shorter time limits just because everybody is really interested in getting their voice heard rather than listening. And so, having short time limits gets everybody's voice into the conversation, and then you're able to extend it after a few rounds of the circle.
Another parameter is the question. What question do you ask? And if you ask a question about that brings people into their felt sense, for example, what are feelings of anxiety, fear, concern that you have in your life? It brings the circle more into a felt experience versus, they can get rather intellectual, for example. So the question, parameter of what is the question going to be, and the effect that it has, on the quality of the circle.
Okay, I'm not sure that I fully understood, so please correct me if I got any of this wrong. But the question that you bring into the circle is going to affect the length of time that you spend with each person's turn.
No, the quality. It'll affect the quality of the emotional quality. If you ask a question that directs people towards an emotional topic, it'll bring the circle into a more emotional, talking about feelings, for
Hmm.
example. So if I ask, what are feelings of fear that you're dealing with in your life currently, it's going to be a much different, um, circle than if you're talking about some intellectual topic, abstract topic.
Okay, so thank you for clarifying that. I had missed that. So my understanding is that the question that you pose is going to be the thing that determines the quality of the circle. So if you're talking about emotions, so having people talk about feelings of anxiety or fear or things like that, that's going to have a different it'll be a very different experience in the circle than if you're talking about more intellectual topics, more abstract topics.
Yeah, I feel very heard. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Um, I will direct my thoughts to Lee, and I'm curious. So I guess the thoughts that we wanted to discuss today, the reason that we have been meeting is talking about definitions of empathy, and it seems that we've landed collectively here. And I know with the Empathy Center and Edwin's work, the definition of interest is more of an active listening. So what we're engaging in now is the practice of active listening, which allows you to empathize more effectively with the other person.
Okay, so basically, Jody, you're saying that the uh, that we're trying to hone in the definition of what empathy is, and essentially, the major ingredient for empathy is active listening, and that's what we are doing today.
Yeah, so we're practicing that skill of active listening. But one thing that it has been really interesting getting really deep into the empathy literature is that not everybody agrees with that. Not everybody agrees that that is the definition of empathy. So there are more definitions. There are probably as many definitions of empathy as there are empathy researchers out there researching it. And so that becomes problematic.
Okay, so basically what you have found is that the definitions of empathy multiple, and it's as many as researchers out there. So you're typically saying, yeah, well, that everyone has his or her own definition, pretty much.
Yeah, and I would love to hear what your definition of empathy is. And I understand that since we've been talking about it as active listening, that's probably going to affect the way that you answer that question. But looking back before this conversation, I would love to get your feel as to how you define the word, and how you maybe not operationalize it, because I know you haven't really looked at empathy specifically, but how you've used it in your life to make your life more enriched and to improve your relationships.
So basically, right now you're very curious about how I see empathy and how it I see it apply in life, basically, right?
Yeah, I
I
feel good.
will I will give you my thought. I haven't really done my
Are
research
you
on
speaking
it.
back to Jody?
Excuse me. Yes.
You
So
okay? You're speaking back to Jodie. Yep.
I'm sorry. It should be your turn, right? So am I
Oh
speaking
no,
now?
she said she was heard, so it's your turn
Yeah,
now,
so you
and
get
you're
to choose.
speaking. Yeah,
So now it's my turn to
yeah,
speak.
your turn.
Oh, okay, I see. And then I'll be speaking back to you, Jodie. Um, so yeah, that's a very good question. I haven't really thought about it too much per se about empathy because for me, empathy is a way to yeah, I think I try to keep it simple, I suppose. Um, when the other person is feeling sad or happy, I feel it, right? So empathy, that's the basic understanding. You have the similar feeling as the other person. That I think to me that's the basic definition. So I haven't thought too much more about it. But if I have to think more deeply about that um, similar feeling with the others, you have to be aware of the other person's feeling as well, right? So even though feeling seems to be a dominant component to that, I think the awareness of the other's feeling is also very important. So if um, so I like to keep the definition a little bit simple in such a way that we can understand it. So we can make it more complicated, I suppose. But I think that would be my basic definition.
Okay.
Having similar feeling uh, with others and having the awareness of the others, right? So,
Okay. So when you think of your personal definition of empathy, you try to keep it simple.
mm,
And the way you've experienced it has been feeling the same feeling with another person. So if they're feeling sad, you feel sad, for
mm,
example. And you also said that you notice that there's an important component of awareness of
mm,
the other person's emotional experience. And so
mm.
keeping it really simple, it would be awareness and sharing.
Correct, correct. Now, when you say how I apply empathy, that's a very good question. How do I apply for it in life? I think in general, I try to understand the other person. I try to practice understanding the other person most of the time, right? And I think that's important because that's how we can relate with others, um, um, how we can understand what the other person needs, how we can um, connect with the other person. So to me, um, empathy is very important in that sense. Um, but then I also remember what you said, because one of your concerns, Julie, is that when you empathize with the other person, you may be losing your own self. I think we have so I think as a moral agent, I think we should be able to empathize the other person. So while we maintain our own self. So that would be my moral agency thinking. I'll explain why later.
Okay.
Mm,
Yeah, I definitely want some more explanation on the moral agency side of it. But the way that you apply empathy in your life is trying to really understand where the other person is coming from. And this helps you to be able to relate with other people, and it helps you to connect with people when you are trying to understand where they're coming from. And then you mentioned that in your role as a moral agent,
mm.
uh, there's some important component there that I didn't quite understand. So I would like to circle back to that.
Oh, yes, definitely. Um,
That was the
I
time
think
too. It'll come back to you. So yeah, that was 3 minutes.
uh, okay, we'll talk later maybe.
Yeah.
Oh no, it'll come back. Okay, Jody.
Okay. So Edwin, I'll speak to you.
Okay, listening.
And so when we're looking at all of these myriad definitions, of empathy, it seems that what's emerging from the many people I ask this question to is that it is largely an emotional experience. And that there's one part of that that concerns me, because there is a misalignment between people who study empathy deeply and who know all of the ins and outs of empathy and the way that people experience it in their daily lives.
So you're seeing a difference in how people who study empathy, how they see empathy, and people who are kind of more superficially talking about it, and people who, from that point, they talk about the feeling aspect more.
Yeah. And the reason that that concerns me, I mean, there are many reasons I'm
Oh,
concerned
okay.
about this whole topic, but um, two things that come to mind of why I think it's concerning. Number one, when we have in the literature, we have a misalignment of definitions from operationalization. So the measures that we use don't align with the definitions that we're using.
Mhm.
And then the second thing that comes to mind that I think is concerning is that um, if we're talking about this within the context of an empathy circle, we are really focused on a process. But then if most people are viewing it as an emotional experience, they're thinking of it as something that's more like you don't really have a choice. It just kind of happens to you. And I'm not saying that Lee was saying it that way because she's also talking about awareness, but the way that a lot of people talk about it is in terms of emotion contagion. And
Mm-hmm.
so I think that it's a different process than what we're talking about.
Yeah, so people, you're feeling some real concern about some disconnects here. That the disconnect between how the public sees it, or some people, and then researchers, uh, and you said a lot there. My
Yeah,
brain
I'm
wasn't
sorry.
holding it. So yeah, but the main thing was you're feeling some concern about two different aspects that. Yeah, maybe if you could say it again.
Yeah, so when we have so many different definitions, we end up with research that
Oh,
that has one definition, but then a measure that isn't measuring the same thing.
yeah. So I can let me get that part. So there's
Yeah.
one the second concern you had was you have a definition and then you got research, some kind of research, and it's actually not even researching the definition that's been. So there's a disconnect between the definition and the phenomenon that
Mhm.
is being measured.
And so, yeah, that's leading to a lot of just murky waters that I'm wading through in the research that, and like you and I have discussed with Against Empathy and all of those books that are making it into the bad guy, we're talking about a different thing, but we're using the same word.
Yeah. So you're just seeing that as a real problem that people are talking about this empathy being bad, but we're talking about different phenomenon, basically, but different experiences. And you have concern about that. You just have feel some concern.
Yeah, yeah, I definitely feel concerned about it, and I feel
And that was a time to.
okay.
So
I
I'll
feel
speak
concerned.
to Lee.
Oh, it's my
Uh,
turn to speak.
Now my turn to speak to. I'm selecting you
Oh,
to speak to.
I see. Okay.
Yeah. So in terms of the emotions, Jodie was telling me she feels concern, right? She said it multiple times. I feel concern, concern. So concern is a feeling, right? So I could feel her concern. I reflected back her concern. So I hope she feels heard that I understood, that I, sensed her concern.
Right. So, Edwin, you're saying that empathy has to do with concerning, right?
I know
Which
that Jodie was
Jody,
sharing
oh,
her
okay, okay.
concern.
Oh, okay, excuse me. All right. Thanks for clarifying. So you're reflecting back with what Judy said about empathy, which has and that seems to relate to the word concerning a lot, right? How uh, one concerned about uh, and how one you reflect the concern, how you uh yeah I forgot the
Yeah,
other
yeah,
part.
I can
Basically,
continue.
yeah.
So I am sensing I'm empathizing with Jodie in the empathy circle. I'm sensing her concern because that's an emotion, that's a feeling she has. So I'm sensing into Jodie, which for me, which is empathy, sensing into the experience of other, and I'm able to have my self-other distinction. So I know that it's her concern, it's not my concern, and I'm able to reflect that. So for me, that's what empathy is the sensing into the experience of another. That
Right.
their full being, feelings, everything. They're full. Yeah.
I see. Okay. So basically, when you're saying that empathy has to do with sensing
Mhm.
other person's concern, right? And you're
Their
able
whole
to,
being, not just their concern, but their whole being.
oh, okay, sensing the other person as a whole being. And you try to reflect that. And you also have the sense of the self and the others as well. Okay, so basically that is empathy to you.
Yeah. Now we could have this emotional contagion where Jodie is sharing her concern. And instead of me reflecting her concern, I would just say, I feel so concerned too. I am so worried. I'm just, I can't believe it. The world is crazy. I'm so concerned. And
Mm.
so that would have been me taking that concern, kind of taking it on and just disconnecting from Jodie, right? So sometimes people think that that's what empathy is, and it actually is a block to empathy. It seems to me. So there's these very subtle, distinction, and actually the reflection actually helps create that distance. I think.
I see. Well, you said a lot there, but I'll
Yeah.
summarize it. Okay. So basically, you're saying that empathy, sometimes people will say, "Oh, you sense the other person's feeling, and that becomes your own sense." But that overwhelming sensing of the other person become a block to your own um, genuine empathy. So
Hmm.
if you actually that will become the opposite of empathy.
Exactly.
So
Yeah. Yeah.
empathy, right?
I feel very heard. Yep. Thank you.
Mhm.
Your turn. So you're
Well,
up to
you
speak.
feel hurt. You
I feel
feel
very
hurt.
heard. Yes, thank you.
You feel very hurt. Yeah.
Mhm. Thank you. So you can select your listener.
Oh, I see. So I'm done. Okay. Let's okay. Let's take Jodie again. All right. Well, um I think this is wonderful. This is a wonderful experience to me because um yeah I suppose I it's a rare gem to be able to have others understanding having an empathy on me, and
Mm.
also is I think I need to practice more on how to be more empathetic to the other person. So I think this is a very important value.
Okay, so you're experiencing that going through this empathy circle experience is really wonderful. It feels really good to have others empathize with you, and you're noticing that it's helping you to see that you need to practice empathizing with people more.
Mhm. And it also helped me uh, try to learn to actively listen to the other person again. You know, I actually had a communication class when I was undergrad, long time ago, you know. And the first thing I learned there is about active listening.
Mm.
So most of the time I feel that I can do pretty well. But sometimes you need a reminder. You need to, strengthen your own ability. So I think this practice helped me remind me that I have to do that again and again and again.
Okay, so a while ago you had a communication class, and one of the things that you talked about was active listening. And so you feel that you do it pretty well, but it is really a good opportunity to bring it to the forefront of your mind and practice it again.
Right. And so I think based on our conversation today, I can see how the process of empathy works, right? I think what Edwin just said was the process of empathy, right? So I think that's quite interesting how we are able to sense the other person, right? And that we are able to reflect it back. While we're realizing that it is the other person's feeling, which is not necessarily my own, even though I feel the other person's feeling. And so
So you were just reflecting back a bit on what Edwin had said about sensing what the other person is experiencing, and reflecting that back to them. And but then still recognizing that it is the other person's feeling, that it's not your own feeling.
correct. And I think that it's kind of close to what I was trying to mention to you earlier, Jodie, that being a moral agent, um, that we maintain our own self while we try to understand the other person, right? Being empathetic to the other person. And
You mind if I reflect that back now before
yeah,
you say
yeah,
the next thing?
yes,
Because
yes.
I think I'm going to lose that if I don't say it now. um,
Okay.
but you were saying earlier about the role of yourself as a moral agent, and that this is where it comes into play when we're talking about keeping your sense of self. You're able to maintain your sense of self and empathize with the other person, but as a moral agent, you have your own sense of self. Did I understand that?
Yeah, so even though let's say I mentioned earlier that when I saw a character crying, right, I can feel the sadness of the other person. But I'm very I still know where I am right now. I'm being with this person. I understand this person completely and this person's feeling completely, right? But I still maintain who I am. I might think about how I can take the next step as a moral agent to help this person better, right? Right. So remember so let
Yeah. So you were reflecting back on when you have watched a movie and you've been able to feel the sadness with the character. And so the way you see it is empathizing is being with the person, fully with the person, and but then maintaining your sense of self. But the moral agency aspect of this is feeling compelled to do something to help the person.
yeah, exactly. Mhm.
Okay.
And I shifted to 5 minutes, so you just had five. You'll have 5 minutes, Jody.
Okay.
Okay.
Um, I'll speak to Edwin.
Hmm. Listening.
Um, and I think I'm going to probably have to hop off in about 10 minutes, just so we're aware of timing. But the thing that's on my mind is this term active listening. Um, and I'm curious, maybe from both of you, if you can remember to respond to this later, Lee, as well. Um, Active listening, when people hear that, like in my prompt for my experiment, will they know that that means reflective listening?
So you're just curious if people, if they hear the word active listening, if they'll really understand what that means, that they're supposed to reflect back their understanding of what was said.
Yeah, and I mean it is it's common in our vernacular. It is used in a lot of different methods, this idea of active listening. So I would assume that people understand it, but I always want to think about when I'm trying to come up with a prompt that is very clear. I want it to be clear to everybody, not just people who have learned a specific methodology.
Yeah, a lot of people know about active listening, but you want it to be really understandable to everyone, just and even if they haven't heard of active listening, that they'll know what to do.
Yeah, so that's where my mind is right now, and I'm wanting to also think about what we can do in the future with this group. If this is something that we may want to have more interactions with the three of us. I know that we've discussed wanting to bring a few more people into this discussion as well.
Yeah, so you're just thinking about how to proceed with the group and just the three of us or bring other people in.
Yeah,
So
because
kind of opening it up for discussion.
yeah. And Lee and I have been working together on creating what she calls the 3Q community. And so we've been meeting. And I do think that there's value in having your perspective in that community of people looking at the intellectual, the emotional, and the moral component of our actions.
So you and Lee have this project on the three Qs, and you think that my perspective would be helpful on that.
Yeah, likewise, I do think that Lee's perspective that is more holistic, looking at developmental psychology. She is a psychologist, and she's looking at a lot of different components that come into play, especially the moral component.
And Lee's contribution about the moral component and as a psychologist is helpful.
Yeah, I feel heard.
Okay.
I
Well,
know
we
I had
can.
more time than that, but
Oh, yeah, you had 2 minutes left,
yeah,
so
that's all I had to say.
we could just open it up to discussion since we're kind of coming to the close. Just for um, yeah, it's the yeah, in terms of moving forward, my goal is to define empathy within the context. Two things I think are unique about the definition. One is seeing it as a holistic empathy instead of this individualistic empathy. I think these criticisms of empathy come from just seeing it from an individualistic point of view. So I really want to flesh out the holistic empathy model. There's a new book coming out, The Sin of Empathy. So there you go. That's it.
Lovely.
There's a whole flood of anti-empathy books coming out.
What
Um,
are you, anti-kindness? Come on. That's what my initial reaction to you just don't like being kind, but that's because I have a different definition than they do.
yeah, it's a definitional issue, I think, because it's so subtle because it was the subtlety of sensing into someone's experience versus kind of taking it on and then becoming more self-centered is the problem. So that's the first part of and I want to develop keep building that slideshow that I showed you. So I have a slideshow kind of on the basics, and the second part is the mapping it onto the empathy circle. So as we did that. We talked about these different aspects, but we showed it happening within the empathy circle to keep it from getting so abstract. And I think that that is a practical thing to do that anyone can sort of benefit from those differentiations and they can experience it, right? So you could experience it when you were saying, "Oh, I'm feeling concerned," and then instead of reflecting back and say, "Oh, I'm so concerned too." You can feel that what happens versus me reflecting back my understanding. There's an emotional sense that you'll have, so people can experience the different definitions, what we're talking, the aspects that we're talking, facets that we're talking about. And then another component is to map all these definitions onto the empathy circle. So you had a whole list of different definitions. And it's like, well, let's take each of those definitions and how do they fit with where they play out in the empathy circle so we can take them out of the abstract and show them, happening. So that's kind of my goal. And I see what Lee is saying about your sense. You're talking about your sense of self, and you have, your values and everything, and that sense of self. And how does that play out in the empathy circle? What is
Mhm.
so we can map it onto specifically what's happening into the empathy circle and getting more people involved. If there's a couple more people who are interested in the definitions, I'd be glad to have them take part because the ideal number is 4 for an empathy circle. So 4 or 5 is kind of it just adds more richness. So that's kind of where I am.
And would you say that that also helps you to maintain your self-other distinction?
I think so. That sense of self, because you're being reflected. I kind of see it as you're being reflected. Your sense of self gets created by other people seeing you, and there's a lot of documentation about
Yes.
that. And so the more reflections you have from more variety of people, like if we were both very negative on you, saying you're an idiot, you're an asshole, just being very demeaning, you think, oh, I'm this terrible person.
Maybe
But
that is who I am.
but yeah, but you have more perspectives, and it's like somebody says, "Oh, you're lovely," or whatever, that's just judgments. But that you
Mhm.
see different parts of yourself through the reflection of others. So I find that in a world of chaos, being empathized with by others gives you that sense of identity. And Rogers talks about that too, that people with a low sense of identity, that they need to be seen.
Mm.
So yeah.
Yeah, I love that. Um,
Mhm.
I do want to play around at some point with the idea of switching up the order of when I'm done reflecting, it's not immediately my turn to talk. Would that be something you'd be interested in just seeing how that flows?
Yeah, we
Maybe
can experiment with it. I'm glad to experiment. I do want to kind of keep a focus on the definition. Could kind of
no,
see how
and
does it affect is how does it affect the definition of empathy and what yeah. So if as long as we kind of keep on that definition
yeah, I think
aspect.
that when we meet again next week, we do need to start mapping the definitions that I've compiled onto the empathy circle. So I guess I'll leave the question to Lee. Is this a project that you're interested in being involved in? I know it's not exactly, it's really not the same thing as what we're doing with the 3Q community, but I do see some valuable overlap.
Oh, and I definitely see some in overlapping and some usefulness for the empathy circle. I think this is very fundamental for being a moral agent. So I think, yeah, I don't mind getting involved, just so you know. And I do have questions though. Because like you, I'm interested in the definition um, of empathy. But how do you define it really matters in some way, especially when you do the research, right?
Mhm.
So when I want to talk about the active listening part, when you have that question, Jodie, earlier. Um, so my thought is that when I'm actively listening to the other, I'm not reflecting right away. It's really different from reflection.
Yeah.
Reflection is the so when you're actively listening, your part at that time is really just listening, trying to understand, trying to um, get the feeling, be aware of the feeling of the other. So that's the active listening part. What's the function of active listening, right? Trying to be aware and try to understand the feeling of the other.
And reflecting your understanding to
But
make sure that your
but
understanding is
reflecting to me
correct.
is the second part,
Yeah, I
Mhm.
think
the follow up.
there are two.
So it's not part of active listening itself. So reflecting is a way to to be more accountable. So is reflecting is a way to tell whether you your active listening part is working or not.
Mm-hmm.
So in a way, the reflection is a measure. So how well can I reflect back onto you? Now, when I'm reflecting, the way I can tell whether my reflection work is that if my reflection is similar to what you just said, right? So if I look back at the transcript, I can see whether I can reflect well or not.
Mm-hmm.
Or if you are the third party um, who is observing this conversation, that third party can help determine whether that reflection is working well or not. So I'm saying that reflection itself may not be the same. It's not the same as active listening. So that would be my view.
Yeah. So
Okay.
I'm thinking in terms of my experiment, if I should change the phrasing to be reflect back what you hear or something.
I don't know about that, but I think what you have is fine, but just be aware though.
Yeah. Yeah.
I
I think
think
that's
what you
fair.
have in the prompt is fine in general because that's fundamental, I would say. Having the active listening part is fundamental to be to have empathy.
Mhm.
So I wouldn't miss that. But I'm saying that reflection itself, I don't know whether it can be counted as part of empathy. But reflection is a good way to tell whether your empathy is working or not.
So you're saying that empathy is an internal process, and then the reflection is your measure of how well you're empathizing.
It's reflection is reflection in a way is to show whether your empathy is working or not, whether you understand or so
There's
to me
another
that's
component. There's another
yeah.
component to it that the speaker is checking if the person got them too. So that's even a third kind of aspect. Like, did they really understand what I'm saying? Because the goal of the empathy circle is for you to feel heard and understood to your satisfaction as the speaker. So that's like another sort of
That's
aspect.
correct. So I'm not dismissing reflection itself. Okay. I'm saying that reflection itself is not empathy, but reflection shows whether you are being empathetic or not.
Yeah. I hadn't thought of it that way. And I think that's a good point.
But it
And
also deepens your empathy. I mean, from when I interviewed, can't remember his name, his accurate empathy, he found that the activity of doing the reflection actually deepened the empathy
Hmm.
for people, which is
yeah, I'm not surprised about that.
mhm.
I think that's very useful. Actually, reflection is very useful for empathy.
Yeah, that's interesting.
And my other question has to do with holistic empathy. How do you actually define holistic empathy? Are you talking about basically
Mm,
an
mhm.
nope?
I
Yeah.
posted the my slideshow on that, so I just put that in there. So if you watch that, you can see kind of the basic. It's very kind of first draft, 10-minute slideshow on sort of the definition of kind of the foundation of defining it, and the holistic empathy is empathy in a group like us, like what is the felt do we feel that we understand each other in this circle? Are we totally at loggerheads to understand each other as a group, the group feel, or do we, like, I feel like I feel quite understood, and by both of you, so it creates a group feel, a
Mm,
group sense, and a group sensitivity, and that sensitivity is what I'm calling holistic empathy.
I
Because
see.
one of the criticisms that people are they're having of empathy is that if they have a topic, let's say, abortion, one person for, one person against, and then, somebody maybe and then that not every voice will be heard, right? Or this, and so that's, they're saying, well, empathy is bad because you're only listening to one voice. But if you have holistic empathy, is everyone who needs to be in the conversation is there. So, but
Mm,
yeah, that's and Jodie and I have talked about this a bunch, about that in psychology, it's a very individualistic mindset. And
mm.
so you're not seeing it from the group relational aspect in psychology a lot. It's like, it's like just, yeah, it's defined, things are defined from an individual. So it's a lot of stuff
Very
to explore.
Freudian obsession with the ego. And then it turned into the obsession with the self. And so the self became the focus of where the empathy happens. And it's not really taking into consideration what he's talking about with like this relational component where it's like I'm empathizing me inside myself. I'm empathizing with you who's other, like you're outside of where the empathy is happening. But what we're getting at here with holistic empathy is it's the quality of the relationship between us.
And the empathy circle, I think, is a sort of a minimal viable structure that supports relational empathy between all the participants. Uh,
Mm.
so you can kind of experience a deeper connection with the group.
So if I have empathy with you, Edwin, but I don't have empathy with Jodie, do I still have that holistic empathy?
There is a level, it's a degrees, right? We have a certain degree of empathy, but we could take it higher in terms of you developing more empathic connection with Jody as well. So I guess I just see it as a matter of there's always relational empathy, and what is the level of the depth, the height, the depth, whatever the metaphor of empathy in the group.
I'd be curious, like, you know, there are in-group and out-group, right? How does that holistic empathy work between groups, especially groups that are very different from each other?
Yeah, the groups, when they're so different from each other and they have such disconnection, I would say that's an empathy deficit. That's a shortage of empathy. The fullness of empathy was all the people empathizing with each other. And if these groups form and they're not empathizing with each other, then we have an empathy deficit in the holistic empathy. And that
Mhm.
comes up a lot in the criticisms of empathy, that what you're just speaking about right now, that phenomena
Mhm.
of group, you know.
Yeah, because it's easier to empathize with people within your group, and that can actually, some of the research has shown that that can lead to otherizing and more discrimination toward people who are part of another group. And so it's a positive thing that actually has negative detriments if we're viewing it as I only empathize with the people who are like me.
But it's not the problem of empathy, it's the problem of the judgment, I would say. So the criticism is of empathy in those points. And I would say the problem is a lack of empathy versus empathy being the problem, because empathy is criticized for being only towards one group as if it's some natural state of empathy. Whereas I would say the natural state of empathy is we all empathize with each other, and that some people are not empathizing. So it's an empathy deficit instead of a problem with empathy. Yeah.
Yeah, so the relationship you have with the other person or with the other group, right? Or your affiliation with the other group from your, let's say, from your political orientation or all of those, may affect how you have empathy with the other person,
Yeah.
right?
If you're a
How do,
Democrat or Republican,
yeah,
you're going to have these blocks to
yeah.
empathy for the other side. Yeah.
Well, there's a lot of stuff to do there.
There's a lot to
Even
unpack.
within a family, when people have different political orientation within the family, you know, they may not have empathy with each other, but I don't know how that play out.
Well, I'm going to put a link to a video, Lee, to some mediation that we did between the political left and right. It's in the
Uh,
chat now. And you can see that sort of is using empathy to sort of mediate between the two sides.
uh,
So that's a sample of how it would work. And you can see at the end we did 5 pairs of people, from both sides. And 5 of the groups gave hugs to each other at the end. And
oh,
on the other side of the street, they were screaming and yelling at each other, and the police were keeping them apart. So
Powerful.
did you publish that?
it's in a documentary called Trump Phobia, What Both Sides Fear. And this is an excerpt. It's like 11-minute excerpt from that
Oh,
documentary.
I'll check it out. It's
Yeah.
interesting.
Let me know what you think.
Yeah. Okay.
Very interesting.
Okay.
Well, I'm planning on meeting with you again next week, Edwin. And Lee, we can talk about when we want to hold one of our 3Q meetings again. And I don't know if you want to come to our meeting next week. We're going to be talking more about the same thing. I'll leave that up to you to decide, but we're meeting weekly.
I see. I see. Yeah, let me think about it. I'm curious about your empathy circle, and I think can be very useful. And I could, yeah, if you have the impact between the political left and right, I think that's something that we need to explore further. We need
Yeah,
to
if you see
expand
the
on it.
sorry. Yeah, if you
Oh,
see the
no,
video, it'll yeah, kind of show you the potential because it was all done with an empathy circle, all the mediation. And so next week, Jody, we would look at some of those other definitions and see if we can map it onto the empathy circle.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea.
Okay.
All
okay.
right.
Cool,
Well, I
great.
will
Well,
see you
good
later.
seeing you, Lee. Meeting
Well,
you.
it's nice
A
meeting
lot
you,
of fun.
Edwin. And yes, I'm glad that I'm a part of this conversation.
Right. Yeah, and I'm sure it could fit in the empathy circle could fit in with your, self with a moral sense of what people bring to the empathy circle and how that kind of fits in. So yeah, love to
Yes,
have you take part.
yes, I can definitely see that.
Alrighty,
Okay, thank
bye
you.
everyone.
Have a
Have a
good
good
week,
care.
everybody.